So, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending where you are, and welcome to the Apheleia Conference Series 2025. Today, our speaker is Professor Marta Arzarello. Allow me to introduce you briefly, Marta, which is a professor at the University of Ferrara, specializing in prehistoric archaeology and lithic technology. Her research focuses on early human settlements, stone tool production, and technological adaptation in Paleolithic societies. She has led and collaborated on numerous international projects, contributing to the understanding of early hominin dispersals and cultural evolution. As coordinator of the International Master on Quaternary and Prehistory Master Program, she integrates cutting-edge research with advanced training in archaeological sciences. So, Professor Arzarello today brings us an interesting lecture, which title is Prehistory in the Future, Lessons Learned, Lessons Forgotten. So, Marta, when you want, the floor is yours, and welcome and thank you for bringing us this lecture.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you also to Ries Osterbeck and generally to the Apheleia project. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everybody. And as Fernando already told you, I will try to focus on a topic that is really not my main topic of research. So it will be more a reflection that I hope to share with you and I hope to discuss also with you at the end of the lecture. So we will try to understand prehistory and the future, and specifically I will only try to define if from prehistory we can learn lesson, and if yes, can we remind those lessons or those lessons are suddenly forgotten? It's a quite hard topic because for prehistory, the oldest prehistory, and we will focus in everything that is mainly before Homo sapiens. Our fossil record, it's complicated. Of course, we have nothing written, we have spotted information. And so we will try to see if some main topics could be understood. And of course, we will have to start by the questions. I think that for prehistory, we have really a lot of questions, but very few answer or very few precise answer. As everybody know, prehistory, it's a topic that could be affronted only with a very high international interdisciplinary approach, but the data that we can obtain are fragmentary because we can have very precise data. For example, I'm a specialist in lithic technology, so I can detect from also a very old site where the prehistoric humans went to collect the raw material, how exactly they knapp, what they do with, but we miss all the other information that are around. Once they have used their stone tool, what they were doing during the day, how they enjoy, and so on. So all the considerations that I will do during this talk are, of course, partial, because never forget when we use the word culture, talking about the early prehistory, we are using only the material culture. We are only using the objects that are produced and only the ones on stone, because the founding of wood instrument is very rare, and so we are studying a very, very small part of our ancestors' history. Never forget it, and we will see what we can detect from this starting point. So, the first question is, what is the connection between our present and the prehistoric time, if there is a connection? And can we assume that our ancestor faced global challenges? maybe yes, maybe no. And as everybody know, the natural selection is the biological process that is the basis of the evolution. Of course, evolution is a very complex system, but the natural selection, once uh, defined firstly by Darwin, it's an important part of his history. And is the natural selection working today? For this question, we will see there are a lot of different ideas. And by continuing, what recurring partners can be identified from prehistory to the present day? There is something that starts during prehistory that we still do, that we still have, that we are still doing in the same way. And finally, can prehistory provide magnificent insight into resilience, crisis management, and innovation? I suppose that everybody, once in his life, has heard the word we have to learn from the past to organize our future. I suppose that was the first sentences that your professor of history tell you when you were a child. But finally, this is real or not? And can prehistory be considered as a period from which we can learn? Um, I have any clear answer to those questions, so we will try more to analyze them one by one. Of course, we have firstly to face to a big problem. Our past and our future could be very, very far one to the other. You have to imagine that basically all the dates that he used for prehistory are conventional. We decide them when the Paleolithic start, we decide them on arbitrary consideration. Generally, we are considering that the prehistory starts with the first productions of lithic industry that it's about 3.3 million years ago in Africa. Of course, 3.3 million years ago in Africa, there was any representative of the genus Homo. This is mean that the first lithic industry were made by Australopithecus genus. And so maybe we have also to learn from Australopithecus. So this gap, it's one of the biggest problem in the study of prehistory because uh, it's a very long evolution. In the first part of this long evolution, we don't have real clear partners, and it's something that it's so far in time and normally people not used to deal with a long chronology and specifically with geology and prehistory are not used and cannot understand. Sometimes people could not do the difference between 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 1 million years ago. And in this long span of time, for sure, we can see an acceleration in growth of technology. Of course, it's complicated to define what is technology, because I'm sure if I'm asking to each of you what technology is, each one of you will give me a different example. So I suppose most part of us will give as an example of technology our cell phone. I'm coming more or less from the Middle Paleolithic, and so when I was young, the cell phone was not even possible to be imagined. And today, everybody has a cell phone. I was expecting the flying car, but not the cell phone. I would prefer a flying car than a telephone. And so, even if technology is not clear what is it, we can for sure see that the growing and the acceleration is very fast. From the 1950 more or less, we have an exponential incrementation and growth of technology. Here in the graph, you can just see some example. Here in the right one, Of course, the chronology is not taken into consideration. The scale here is not correct, but you can see that from the first stone tool to arrive, for example, to the use of fire 400,000 more or less year ago, we have more than 2 million years. But from the first writing to the computer, we have less than 5,000 years. And so you can see that everything is going very fast. But by the other way, we have to define if this acceleration and this technology is really the introduction of new idea, or is something that is just modified in order to become more performant and better. So some authors are considering that the first use of stone's tool, the first production of stone's tool, it's a technological jump higher than the man of the moon. But again, for the man of the moon, from the first writing to the first man in the moon, we have more or less 5,000 years. And from the earliest lithic industry to the discovery of fire, we have 2.8 million years. So why the technology was or seems to go so slow in the beginning and is going so fast in our present day? Maybe this is also related to our definition of technology. And according to this evolution of technology, we can try to define some behaviors that emerged during the lower Paleolithic and that we have preserved today. We were saying that in a conventional way, the lower Paleolithic is starting more or less 3.3 million years ago when the first lithic production appears, or 2.5 if we want to wait to the moment where we have more lithic industry, and finish again on arbitrary basis 300,000 years ago when innovation appeared in technology, that is the one knapping method called Levallois. So during the lower Paleolithic, we have several behavior that could be recognized. Of course, it's from the lower Paleolithic that we see the emergence of toolmaking and technological innovation. Of course, when Homo or Australopithecus start to make tools, this means that they can control in somehow the nature, because they can modify the nature to obtain something that they need for one purpose. Never forget that all the technological innovation, at least in prehistorical time, are coming from a necessity. So I have a necessity and I will develop something. And it's also in the lower Paleolithic that we can see the emergence of the social cooperation, because it's clear since very early sites that the group of human was complex, and maybe this social complex is something that we have keeping also today. The use of fire is probably the thing that is more close today to our prehistoric ancestors. As we have seen before, the use of fire appears, it depends from the place in the world, around 400,000 years ago. The systematic use of fire and the capacity to have the fire. And this it was fundamental for cooking. And the cooking, it was had probably a very high impact on evolution. Of course, it was useful for warmth and for protection. Today, considering today our last century, is still fundamental for cooking and for warmth. Of course, for protection, it's less important. And of course, the use of fire, it's marking a turning point in human evolution, because the Homo can colonize new places, even in very cold period. And as I told you before, the fact of cook the meat have changed a lot in the behavior and in the biology of our ancestors. Territoriality and mobility are in prehistory the response to changing environments, and resources continues and this continues in today's global migration. Of course, the actual migration can be related to several other um, causes that were not present in prehistory or that we cannot recognize during prehistory, but the mobility in response of environmental changing is still actual today. And we have to think that also we as Europeans are here according to this specific aspect. And so I think the mobility of human population and the use of fire are the two aspects of Paleolithic and lower Paleolithic in specific that are still the same today. And of course, something that appeared for sure during lower Paleolithic and that is still present today, it's the learning and knowledge transmission. Um, uh, all the technological gesture are surely passed from one person to the other by that knowledge transmission. We will not affront here because it will be a too big discussion the language acquisition, and also because the theory about when Homo start to have an articulated language are very different. But generally speaking, a lot of authors consider that for the transmission of knowing, language is necessary, and so that one kind of communication began very soon in prehistory. We will not talk about Middle Paleolithic because during Middle Paleolithic, basically, we have a consolidation of what we have seen before, and we go to the Upper Paleolithic. The Upper Paleolithic is characterized by the presence of one species, that is Homo sapiens. Before, we have a lot of species altogether. The culture are not related to the specific Homo species. During Upper Paleolithic, we have the Homo sapiens and only the Homo sapiens. And it's with the Upper Paleolithic where we start to see some behavior that are typical of us. In an Upper Paleolithic site, you can recognize yourself. So it's with the Upper Paleolithic where we have the art and symbolic expression. We have a long distance exchange of raw materials and also of not functional raw material, things that are just nice. We have a very complex tools production and technology. We have for sure a structured social organization. On this point, I want to add that, of course, for sites that are less ancient, it's easier to see and to recognize the structured social organization. For the lower Paleolithic and middle Paleolithic, it's more complicated to really recognize. So we can exclude a very structured social organization also in previous time. And finally, it's with Homo sapiens that ritual and spiritual life appears. Of course, we have some example also of ritual life for Neanderthal that are very discussed, but in any case, they are not always present. It's with Homo sapiens that we start to have symbolic artifacts, burials. Neanderthal also buried the death, but less systematically and chronologically after than Homo sapiens. And so we can start to see a lot of practice related to the life, the death, and the sacred. And this is absolutely still deeply embedded in our culture. So now that we have seen that we have some evidences of behavior that appear in prehistory and that are still characterizing our species, even if what we have defined for lower Paleolithic is not related to our species, but to our ancestor. Now, we can ask to yourself if it is appropriate to refer to global challenges in the context of prehistory. The global challenges are today the mainstream definition, and we are trying to consider some challenges as something that affect the whole world. And of course, during prehistory, there is something that has influenced a lot the behavior and also the success of the species. Because how the prehistorical Homo affront the climate change and environmental shift, the resource scarcity, and so the demography, because the increasing of the population is affecting the possibility to have access to the food, and something that today is not, of course, existent is the coexistence with other hominin species. Never forget that it's only from Homo sapiens that we have only one species inside the genus Homo. Before there was a lot living in the same time. Is the human dispersal and mobility a global challenge for prehistory? And what we know about epidemic and health pressure, this is more complicated to know because the way to study is of course, the DNA, but it's not possible to have a lot of data for ancient prehistory. And to answer and to try to see this aspect, of course, we have to refer to an important things, but it's the climate change during prehistory. Here in this graph that you will see better here, you can see some oscillation. This is the oxygen curve. Here in the lower part, it's the time. So we are going from more or less 1 million to today. And in the blue part, you will have a cold period. In the red part, you will have a hot period. As you can see, in the last millions of years, we have a lot of fluctuation. And we have period so much colder than today, but also so much hotter. Here, it's today. For example, here, it's the isotopic state 5. And in isotopic stage 5, we have a period where the mean of the climate was hotter than today. So why today we are saying, wow, the climatic change and so on? Because this curve that you can see is a progressive curve. It's something that is prepared and happen. So the problem of today is not the temperature, it's the increasing in the time that the temperature need to increase. So we can take an archaeological example from the Middle Paleolithic, that is the Grotta della Ciotacciara in Borgosesia, but it's in northern Italy. You can see here where is the star. We'll start the excavation there tomorrow, by the way. And this is an occupation of Homo neanderthalensis. The date that we have are more or less from 300,000 in the lowest level until more or less 150,000 in the upper level. And around 200,000 years ago, we have also human remains attributed to Homo neanderthalensis. So here we are in a period where we have cold and hot moments. Those are some of the human remains we found. And so around 200, 300,000 years ago, we can see that the Homo neanderthalensis has different characteristics in the different part of Europe. And if you are going in deep in this analysis, we can see that in the stratigraphic unit 14, the average of the temperature was 5. In the unit 13, the average of the temperature was 11. Today, it's 10.7 for the area. It means that the Homo neanderthalensis that was already living there has faced a huge climate change because in more or less, we would say 100,000 years, they passed for an average of 5 to an average of 11. But why it could be possible? Because it happened in 100,000 years. So the species have the time to adapt. And the other interesting thing, of course, here in the upper part, you can see how the environment was changing according to this, because of course we are passing from open woodland to open dry and to humid area and to a real woodland. So if we try to put in correlation the climate and the Homo behavior, you can see that the Homo was adapting to the climate, was changing the use of the cave according to the climate. So in the cold period, in the lower part, in the older one, where the occupation is older, we can see that the Homo was going there just to hunt. They say few time and they was going back after. And during the hot time, they were staying in the cave during long time. So the behavior was changing a lot according to the climate. And it was changing a lot the kind of activity that we can record into the site. In the very cold period, there was knapping very few, using the local raw material, and they use the instrument only to process the animal carcasses. During the hotter period, they were using more raw material, also coming from far. They was performing different activities. So they was, of course, made food processing, carcasses processing, plant working, skin working, and so on. And going up in a period that is not cold like the lowest one, but it's not hot like the middle one, again, we have a reduction of activity. So we can see how in the past the Homo adapt to climate by change their attitude. And I suppose we cannot say it today. And another point that, of course, we have to consider, it's the natural selection. I was telling you in the beginning that the concept of natural selection, that is as the basis of evolution, is very clear for the first phases of the Homo evolution, but it's very clear for the biology of all the animals. And this is present also today. But today, can we consider to that the natural selection is acting like it was before? The selection continues to operate through other mechanisms today because we introduce a new variable that is the cultural selection. What does it mean? It means that culture sometimes is becoming more important than your natural characteristics. Just a stupid example that is not very scientific. In the past, if you were living in a cold environment, you need one body that is adapted to the cold. For us, we just need to go in a shop and buy more clothes. And to see how the natural selection is acting, I will give you two examples, one for the prehistory, one for the actual days. One of the more evident example of natural selection is the bipedalism. As you know, we are not coming from the apes. We have just a common ancestor dated back to more or less 7 million years ago with the actual apes. And this is why we say that they are our cousin. And our common ancestor was not a bipedal, was not a quadrupedal was something indifferentiate. And this is why in one side we specialized in bipedalism, and the other sides we have the actual PAM. So for the natural selection has act in the acquisition of bipedalism because because of course to be bipedal we need a lot of modification in our skeleton. So you can see that we have a different organization of the pelvis because the equilibrium is in a different place. We have a change in um, vertebrae, and we have a lot of changing. We have, for example, elongated femorus and tibia, narrow pelvis, longer lower limbs, and our body proportions are generally changing and are consistent to Allen's rule. And what happened with the bipedalism? Basically, the selection of bipedalism increased fitness in open and warm environments. And this is why we were adapted to live into the savannah. And so the locomotion enhanced the chance to access resources and surviving. So something that it seems to be uh, not important has a lot of implication. But today, can we have some changes of this time? By the way, here you can see how the bipedalism was a really long process. I was telling you before that our last common ancestor with the pan, it's around 7 million years ago. And here in pink and red, we can see our ancestor with a not exclusive bipedi. So during all the phases of our prehistory, the bipedalism was not exclusive. It means that our ancestor was also sometimes living on the trees. And the exclusive bipedalism appeared around 2 million years ago. So it was a quite long process, but this long process has a lot of impact in our surviving, in our evolution. Today, natural selection has really different way to act, because if before the individuals that were going to bipedalism has more possibility to survive and so to reproduce and so to pass their bipedalism, today the things have changed because the way of selection are natural in some case, but in some other are strictly related to culture, because we have a sexual selection. And this is the criteria that influence the choice of the partner, and this could be cultural. We have a differential reproduction. It means that not all individuals have the same number of children. Of course, ones who will have more children will pass the characteristic. We have the adaptation to new environments, but it's related to lifestyle. So we have not physical modification to adapt to a specific environment. We change the environments around us. So today, the cultural and technological selection strongly influence both the survival and the reproduction. And this cultural and technological selection is acting more than the natural selection. And basically, the natural selection is, of course, still active in humans, but the mechanism and the environmental pressure have changed if we compare to the past, of course. Evolution is still going on, but today the effects of evolution are not seeable in the short time and have not the same effects that in the past. And so if we have seen that something very important change, and specifically how the selection act. We saw that some behavior are present from prehistory, but can we really say that we have recurring patterns from prehistory to present day? And if there are recurring patterns, did we learn anything from these um, recurring patterns? We have already stated that migration and human mobility are something that's still up, and it's the response suddenly to environmental change. The cultural expression and identity is something that exists and is used to define group, to define identities, and to transmit values. And those differences, we don't know which effect has during prehistory, but we know which effects have today. And finally, the environmental adaptation is quite complicated to be analyzed because in the previous time, as we have seen in the example of the Chotachara cave, the Homo was adapting the behavior to environmental changing. Today, we are mostly changing the environment in order to be able to live there. As it's quite hard to define if prehistory provide meaningful insight into resilience, crisis, and so if prehistory can give us lesson. I asked to ChatGPT because today it's a little bit the mirror of our thinking. Also, if sometimes it's very assertive. And so basically, ChatGPT, of course, when you ask something, tell normally yes, but I found some interesting information from them because we have the typical sentences studying how prehistorical men managed to persist without centralized institution reveals deep-rooted human strategy for resilience. It's true that during prehistory there was not a centralized institution, and so it's true that they can manage some problematic without it, but it's also true that at that time the density of the population was very lower if compared today. And of course, ChatGPT tells us that the crisis management was already learned in prehistory because the prehistorical society were flexible. And this is something that we also tell today about our society. And finally, uh, always ChatGPT tell us that prehistory remind us that innovation is not only about breakthroughs, but also about collective knowledge, experimentation, and persistence. And this is the nice thinking also of today. But as you know, ChatGPT, it's always very assertive. So the first answer of ChatGPT, don't mind the question, will be always positive. Because ChatGPT is thinking that if you ask a question, it's because you have an answer and will never tell you, no, there is no answer. No, I don't know. So I've tried to push it a little bit more, ChatGPT, saying, are you sure? I'm not sure that is the truth. And so if we tell to ChatGPT to not answer us in a positive way, this is what it's saying. So it's assuming that prehistoric society lacked the complexity scale and technology of today's world. So the ways of coping with crisis or change bear little resemblance to modern systems. And I think that the real answer is in the middle. Of course, it's very complicated to see how the prehistoric society faced crisis. In some way, they show us that if we are here, they can affront the crisis, but by the other side, we have not enough information about how it happened, and we cannot so well compare something with a population that is less bigger than the one of today. So as the finality of our talk is to say if prehistory give us lesson and what we have learned from prehistory. I've tried a lot to find something that we learn. I try a lot to find something that in the present day, maybe you will find one. So I hope you will uh, you will take the floor after and you will tell me if we have learned something. But really, really talking about real things, it's quite complicated. But I found some lessons that we have forgotten because I found things that were basically well managed in prehistory and not so well managed today. Uh, for example, in prehistory, we have example of intensive resource use, such in the later prehistory, soil exploitation, and this is showing us that there is long-term stability and an overexploitation. And this overexploitation is documented. For example, when Homo arrived in Australia, when Homo arrived in Australia in a very short span of time, they were able to make extinct more than 80% of all the biological species. So yes, we have seen that the Homo um, can have very big damage to the environment. But also, if the Homo arrive in Australia and make extinct a lot of the extinction of a lot of species, we are still in Australia, and it seems also that in Australia you live where? After prehistoric communities solve problem with minimal resources because they go through glacial period without any heater, just with fire, just with probably some clothes and so on. And we have not the impression of a decreasing of a number of people. And this was evident for almost all our ancestors. In contrast, modern innovation sometimes depends on abundance and waste rather than necessity and sustainability. For sure, something that prehistory learned to us is the sustainability, and today we are far from that. Concerning, as I told you before, the lesson learned, I have found nothing. And this is why I hope we will have questions and discussion after, because probably there is something that we have understood from prehistory. But generally speaking, and to conclude, I think that from our past life, and from our evolution, we have catch any fundamental lesson. And I'm also thinking that we got the not correct lessons because when we are saying that basically the Homo lived during glacial period and so on, so we don't care about the climate change. Sometimes you can hear to things like, yes, but it's not the hotter period in the world, so it's not a problem, and so on. So I think prehistory, if it's not well studied, can do the opposite things, can justify things that are not correct. And according to that, I thank you for your attention. And I thank again the Apheleia and Fernando.
Thank you very much, Marta, for this very interesting presentation. I wonder if I noticed that there are some students seeing this lecture, and I will give the floor to them if anybody wants to ask a question. So go ahead. So I believe Luis has a question, but you must turn on your mic, please.
Thank you very much, Fernando, and thank you and congratulations, Marta. It was a very stimulating talk. I was really happy on listening to it. My question is relates to your last comments. There's a number of things I thought about in your presentation, but I would just focus on the last observation in terms of learning from prehistory. And it relates to a conversation I had earlier this morning with one of our master students who and relates to this. How would you deal in the teaching of prehistory with communities and people that, after all that is explained about human evolution and human adaptations and so on, but particularly human evolution, will answer back to you saying, I do not believe, and I'm talking of people that will believe in an instantaneous creation of men and women, so not as a product of evolution. What would be your answer? Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. You give me the most complicated questions in the world. This is very complicated because I think when we are dealing with believing, there is nothing that could be done because the word believing, it's already saying something. It's something that you believe. Is not based on nothing. And when we believe in something, we don't need any clear scientific proof of our believing because the word said it. I'm believing it. And if you are not looking for scientific information, I think it's impossible to make you change an idea. Really, I don't know how we'll deal, but basically, I think that the way is to show evidences, and the fossils are attesting very well our adaptation, our evolution. But the problem is, even if you show a fossil with the ADN, someone who believe will continue to believe to what he was believing because is not consistent with the science. And so I think in this situation, I will try to explain as clearly as possible which are the evidences of the evolution, which are the evidences of our past. But evidences and research are not fitting so well with such kind of believing. And if you wish to, if you, in the sense, if someone wish to think that it has been created 500 years ago, I think it's impossible to change the mind. I'm not very optimistic.
Well, Fernando has been created 500 years ago. He has a white beard and he's still around.
I didn't hear that.
Thank you, Marta. So, any of you asks any question? So they ask me questions in the car, and then I should become vocal for their questions.
Probably it's better that if the students can approach your camera, and if you could turn on your camera,
no,
maybe
but they
it
don't
would be better because they will appear on the recording. I believe that will be useful for the recording.
Yes, one of them is coming here. It doesn't have, I don't have the camera turned on, just speak to them.
Okay, Professor Arzarello, thank you for your presentation. I think the topic is really interesting because not only in prehistory and the most classical way to speaking, also in archaeology in general and history, try to find that we are learning about the lessons of the past, and we are trying to apply or not commit the same mistakes in the present is really hard. But for example, if we have to explain to someone that is not prehistorian or is not archaeologist or is not interested in the past, basically, how can we define our relevance to other disciplines? If we are not learning very well our lessons, probably for someone that is not archaeologist, is not prehistorian, how can we manage to answer that question?
Well, this is, if it's possible, thank you. It's even more complicated than the question of Luis. Well, in an ideal world, science is science, and you don't need one finality to make science, because the knowing it's the important things. We have to forget that we have not to forget that probably we are the only species who is asking to herself information about our past. We are the only one who are interested or science or on why we are here, how we arrive here. And so curiosity technically must be the only answer that you have to give to someone who is asking you why archaeology. But I know it's not enough. But I think that by a general point of view, if we cannot assume that to make knowing it's largely enough to justify our presence, I think that the information that we can have from prehistory or archaeology in general are several. For example, of course, we have a clear evidence of how archaeology in general terms is attracting people to visit things, because by the way people are attracted by the archaeological sites, maybe the prehistorical one, and this is an effort that must be made, are less attractive because you go to see the Colosseum and after, wow, you go to see a prehistorical site, you see a wall of ground with different color, it's less sexy. So I think we need a higher level of communication to share our knowing and to make the people interested in it. So by a general point of view, I think that especially in prehistory, we really need to develop figure that can communicate, that can do good museum. It's only a recent time that we start to have a very nice museum of prehistory and generally of archaeology, because before it was a Wunderkammer, so it was big museum with 1,000 of vessels, ones after the other, and of course it's not attractive. So one of the finality of our work can be this, so to make the people aware, and people are interested on this. By the other side, I think that of course we can never compare our work to the ones of something that is looking for a disease or is looking for a new energetic production and so on. History, archaeology, consequently, is not teaching, because if you think to recent time, how many years has passed between the First and the Second World War? Very few. And so how people have forgotten the First World War in order to start the second one? Of course, there was a lot of fear before the Second World War, and this is why they left the occupation of Poland, for example. But it's a very short time, and they learn nothing, and they see again the same problems. And so I'm not sure that we can learn from Homo. Of course, we can learn from paleoclimatology. Everything that is paleoclimate, the analysis of previous environment can teach us a lot. because already the isotopic curve show us how the climate is changing, and which must be the time needed for the climate changing. And so it's an objective data that tell you now it's going too fast. I mean, I suppose everybody can see, but even if we have scientific data that is showing that it's going too fast, I'm not sure that people will learn from that and that people will consider prehistory more important. I don't know if I have answered you.
Yes, Professor. Thank you.
Of course, if you want to add something, you can. If
No,
you have
no.
other idea.
I'm just improving my narrative in this topic, but I think it's interesting just that ideas that you explained. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
So anyone else? I believe this, I didn't see, but this was Mauricio, probably.
Yes,
It was Mauricio. Anyone else? Well, if not, I believe we still have 5 times, according to the 5 minutes to the end of the lecture. We can, don't be shy. You can ask more questions. I believe there are more students in the room.
Yes, I was checking if there are any questions on YouTube, but
On YouTube, I also did. There was nothing
okay.
a minute ago. No, there's still nothing on YouTube.
I could then say something if you agree, because I think this is actually very interesting. I also don't believe that society at large will learn anything from the past, not only from prehistory. I don't think it makes a difference if it's prehistory or if it's last week. Most people don't
I
learn
totally
anything.
agree.
But on the other hand, of course, I think there is a sense of raising questions, on the capacity of raising questions, and prehistory expands the notion of time, which is to an almost unbelievable extension. Of course, other sciences do that too, but in the case of prehistory, it puts ourselves in the middle of this long history. And so for some, this is important, and certainly it will, for those who get this notion, it also not so much provides lessons, because history doesn't repeat itself. But you said something before about strategies, and it's true. We understand that sometimes in the past things worked and sometimes they did not work, in the same context, in the same kind of context. And sometimes different human groups facing the same difficulties, some managed to cope with it and others didn't. There's an interesting author, Antonio Damasio, who is a neurosurgeon and a psychiatrist and so on, but he's a philosopher and he writes about these things. And he builds from biology because he's a biologist primarily. And his argument is that there is a tendency in life towards homeostasis, so, or homeostasis, whatever you say that in English. So to a certain kind of equilibrium, a dynamic equilibrium. And he wrote very interesting ideas about what culture is, because many have said before that culture is a natural phenomenon, of course. So culture is our natural way of being natural. But he says more than that. He says that culture has been designed in the end to provide this kind of balance. So natural selection would still operate. but natural selection operates through culture. And the most robust and resilient cultures will be those that are capable of providing a better equilibrium. Doesn't mean static cultures, means cultures that can encompass diversity and so on, and still not break, which is very difficult. And this would give them a leverage. And I think it's an interesting idea. That's all. You know, Marta, you are the expert in human evolution. I work
So
I work more in a human decay. So
but I agree with what you have saying. And the problem is also that it's a subject. There is a high level of subjectivity in this kind of discussion because we have not so many data. And
yeah,
the data can be interpoled, the data can be interpreted in different way. If you look also in scientific research, and the same phenomena described by different researcher could be interpreted in different ways. So it's a really complex context.
yeah, I agree. Thank you, Marta.
So I believe it's time to close now. I thank again Marta for this very interesting lecture, and we could continue to speak about it probably another time. And that's it. That's it. I hope that you continue with this interesting line of research, and all the best for your excavations tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you for everybody, and bye bye. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Marta. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
So that's it.